this quick. Matt's going in for you guys, basically. It's
6
how that
months.
works. All right. Okay. Get the chat up. One of you guys are gonna have to watch The Waiting Room. I don't trust either one of you. We're gonna roll with it.
I got it, man. It's on my second
I
screen.
do a
I'm ready
good
to go.
job. I don't.
So do I. Like he always just like he always
This is
like
so
clicks
rude.
it. Yeah, no.
Rude is who I am. All right, so we have alluded to this over the last really 2 weeks. I think we kind of started out with this as we started talking about the model, and then definitely last week as well. So again, this is what I think differentiates our thought processes from a lot of other educational systems, right? Where when we talk about models, we talk about systems, everybody has one, everybody has an ideal, everybody kind of has a way of which they go about doing things. And one of the things that through our experience being within and practicing a lot of different systems and a lot of different models over the years is that they're all very conceptual, right? And you go to a 3-day seminar, or you go to even like a 10-week curriculum or something of that nature, and you get a whole lot of kind of rules, and you get an algorithm, and you get kind of a system at which you go through things, but none of those are ever given or presented within the context of the people that you actually work with. And one of the things that we try to get the people in these groups to really think about and really kind of start working within is understanding that your training model should probably, and when I say probably, I mean certainly, be more focused and more focused on and kind of and contextually applied based on who you actually work with, and not just the systems or the education or the tools that you like to use based on your bias or that you've invested time in. So one of the things that we typically say, so your training model should be determined by the who rather than the what. And as we go through that, your continuing education down the road probably should be as well, right? Or at least a big portion of it if you really want to serve the people you work with the best. And one of the things that we've all talked about, and Matt, Craig, and I have both talked about quite a bit over the last 2 weeks is, our demographics that we ended up training for the majority of our careers did not match our own biases for the most part, right? And so we could have gone through and taken a ton of continuing education built around our own preferences and not really had anywhere to apply that based on the people that we were working with. And I think, the three of us all kind of figured out early on that what we wanted to train and how we ourselves wanted to train didn't necessarily align with the people we were working with. So we had to really kind of go out of our comfort zones to make sure that we were seeking out education and resources that would best help the people that were actually in front of us based on, the demographic we served and the environment that we trained within. So that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. The questions that we want you guys to kind of ask yourself as you go through this process is, again, does your training match the receiver's interests and needs, right? Is what you're actually, applying on the floor, does that match up with the expectations of the client? And we're going to talk about the biopsychosocial model on Wednesday and dynamic systems theory, but a big part of the BPS model is individual expectations, right? Because that is what's going to kind of tie emotional connotation and experience to the person that you're working with. And that's the part of the BPS that most people actually don't think about much at all. And we're going to talk a lot about that aspect of things. So your personal interest and bias versus what actually applies to them. It might be the same, right? If you've really matched up your environment and your demographic with your own interests and you've been able to go through that process, it might be the same, right? And that's where like Matt, based on his remote coaching, is right there, right? He's interested in powerlifting. He's an athlete himself, and he gets to coach athletes, and that's fantastic. Same thing with my remote population is I get to work with a lot of athletes in a lot of different realms. Same thing with Craig, but in person, none of us really had that. So we kind of have to go through and differentiate the two based on that. All right. So does your model and the variables within it apply to their goals? Right. Again, as we start breaking down, and hopefully you guys have taken a look at the case study doc at this point. But as we go through not only, microcycles and mesocycles and macrocycles, but even the day, the individual training days, does what you're applying actually match, right? Are you going with a very kind of, traditional, prep, power, strength, accessory, etc., when you work with a very detrained general population client base who, is focused on like weight loss and body composition? Does that power section really need to be in there? Do you need intensification based phases, right? Or can you just kind of start driving more accumulation and work on tissue quality and some of these other things, right? So again, not a right or a wrong, just ask questions. Just think about what needs to be done. Are you giving people 20 minutes of prep when they don't need it, right? When you can just get them into a training session, right? Or make that more efficient. So again, are these things matching up? And then finally, are you pursuing education that actually applies to these contexts, right? Are you working in a Gen Pop realm, but continuing to take very specific education based on your own interests and needs, right? Whether it's athletic development or strength sports or whatever, does it match the client needs, based on that? So again, these are kind of the questions that we ask ourselves, and we hope that you guys will also ask yourselves, right? Now, looking at your current business, as we start breaking this down, do you already have a demographic, or are you trying to determine one, right? So you might be a veteran in the industry that has a very specific demographic already niched out, and that's fantastic. That'll make this process much shorter, especially if you're happy working with those individuals, because now we can just go off of that. But if you're a younger trainer that's newer to the industry, you might not have developed that yet. That might not be something that you've kind of gone through and identified. And if that's the case, you kind of have to look at a few different factors, and we're going to go over this. But one of the things that we kind of look at is conceptually just describing your ideal client, right? And this can be a lot of different variables. I've listed a few here, right? So we have age, gender, socioeconomic status, activity level, goal selection, etc. You can get as specific and in the weeds with this as you want to. The broader you are, the less specific you are, the harder it is to target your marketing, is what it really comes down to. And you end up, oftentimes kind of being, master of none, so to speak, right? And I think that's something where, as we go through that process, you want to be, I think, getting very specific and then working your way out is a lot better process than being very vague and trying to work your way in. So I would recommend going through being as specific as possible. Again, you might have, if we're looking at just these right here, if I'm looking at my general clientele, like I want to work with people who are, 25 to 40, male or female. I don't really have a preference there. You might, based on, again, your facility or your demographic or some of your specialties and niches. Socioeconomic status. I want people that are not wealthy, but fair, but affluent enough to where, my prices aren't going to be an issue for them. So most of my clients, I'm looking at an annual income of over $100,000, substantially, sometimes far, far over that. Activity level, I want people with a pretty high training age. I want to work with athletic populations who are very proficient in the gym, especially because I work completely remotely at this point. And I want to make sure that they know what they're doing around a gym, and I can just give them direction and program. And I don't have to worry so much about some of the minutiae and minute details of exercise selection and form and technique and all of those things. And then goal selection, kind of, again, going back to the activity level, I work with a lot of athletes. So I'm working with people who want to get bigger, faster, stronger. They want to work on performance-based goals. I have fun training, programming that. You might be more of a general population coach at this point, and that's fine too. If that's the goal selection, that's going to be more, quote unquote, health oriented, and again, like I said, we use general population as a term, which basically just means they're not performance based. That's everybody else. right? And again, if that's your niche, that's actually probably a good thing, because that's like 95% plus of the client industry base
Yep.
and for the industry. So
It's so much more
actually,
fun too.
yeah, and I love Gen Pop people actually in person. I just find
Yeah.
it hard to train them remotely.
Yeah.
So again, that's more so just looking at the platform that I'm using and the scope of fitness that I'm using right now, where performance based is a little easier, just because those people generally have a higher training age. But in person, I did 10 plus years of only box gym style Gen Pop training, and loved it. So again, no good or bad, right? And we never want to insinuate those things are either good or bad or better or worse or whatever. They're just different, right? So on top of that, any other thing that you can think of, based on that's important to you from a client standpoint, list it out and be specific, right? And again, the more specific you are, as you're kind of going through that process, you can start branching it out and expanding it a little bit if you need to. You might not need to, but you might need to expand your age range. You might need to expand, your socioeconomic status. You might need to expand your activity level, kind of based on what your business looks like and how much actual, people are coming in for consults and et cetera. So who you're marketing to. So again, once you have this, we have to figure out, how to find them and market to them effectively, right? If you're in person, hopefully it's the demographic that already comes to your facility and they're right there in front of you and you just have to show value. If you're online, you need to be able to use social media strategies or, again, other platform strategies, whether it be keyword or whether it be the types of content that you create or hashtags or whatever, to bring those people in, and there's a lot of things that we can talk about there. If you guys have questions on that, be more specific, because that can really go in a lot of different directions. Anything to add to this that I might have skipped over, Craig, Matt?
No, I think you covered everything that I would look at covering.
Yeah, not specifically. Only that, like, if you, like, I agree with having to shift or open your, I guess, range of client base. But the one thing that I especially learned as I was starting out is that will affect how you can set your own pricing as well. Like, if you're trying to bring in people from different socioeconomic backgrounds or with less specific goals or lower training ages, you might have to make concessions elsewhere in order to sort of, I mean, the phrase I use is get off the ground. And I know that we kind of like two people were talking about it in the Discord a little bit. And I agree with everything you guys were saying, but just keep that in mind as well, and then grow from there afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's something where, we talked about this a little bit with business planning, but yeah, early on, as you're building your business, like Craig just said, you probably will have to make concessions of some sort, and that's okay. Again, your day one business plan and structure is not going to be your year one, your year 5, or your year 10, right? So do what you need to do. Like we all have, like, I said this last week, like I've given away more free shit and done free consultations and everything else. Again, those they didn't always benefit me long-term. And I made a lot of mistakes from that perspective, but I'm still, in a situation now where, if I look back on that, that's how I built my business early on. And then I was able to consistently raise prices and create a quality of life that allowed me to enjoy what I was doing and have some kind of scalability and longevity to the industry as well. So again, there's a certain mentality of, grinding really early on in your career. And I hate the term grinding, but you kind of have to eat shit for a few years sometimes in this industry, and work for low pay and work really long hours if you want to get to the good stuff. And that's just kind of how it is. There are a few people that get lucky and are able to skip that process. But again, just like anything else, and, don't build your expectations on the outliers.
Yeah.
Right. Like we say that all the time. And when we talk about your model and your training systems, like don't build it on outliers. Right. It's the same thing with this. Like don't build your business expectations on outliers. People who maybe got to skip some of those steps just because they had some connections or good fortune, as they went through the process. So again, don't want to harp on that too much, but the expectation shouldn't be for this building a business to be easy, because that's not the industry standard in any way. So anyone who tries to sell you that is probably trying to take your money and build their business more than anything else. So as we kind of look at this, again, discovery of the target client, after you've built your archetype, after you've learned how to market to them, how do you communicate with these individuals? Right. And I think this is the thing that, a lot of coaches get stuck on, right? Is they're so used to talking to other coaches that they kind of forget how to talk to the people that are actually going to be paying them money, a lot of the time. And, so there, the question that I would ask is, what is their fitness language? And this is going to have a lot to do with, again, their probably training age and their exposure to training over time. Again, like there's a lot of people, like with social media and everything else, like fitness in general has become more and more popular, and you will get a lot of people who don't work in the industry that know a lot about training. Like that's not uncommon anymore. Like information is everywhere. But you might also get a lot of people that aren't in the industry that have no exposure or idea what training is. And if you want to be able to speak to these people, you have to be able to speak to them at a level that they understand, and this is something that, I disagree with, even with people that I get along with really well in the industry. Like this is one of the big disagreements that I will typically have with them. Especially because, we all know that trainers love their words. Trainers love to try to elevate their education and seem really smart. And, again, maybe that reflects on, what they think about themselves. Maybe that reflects in self-confidence, whatever. But if you're speaking above people's heads, you're not educating and you're probably not influencing their decisions very much. They might say, whoa, those are a lot of big words. That person must be smart. Or they might just keep on scrolling. And I think it's a lot of confirmation bias to kind of go through and only look at the people who engage you. Because we all know, like, all you have to do is look at, open rates for email, CRMs, or look at, again, your engagement on posts where you're engaged probably 5 to 10% of your total following most of the time, right? Where we know that a lot of people, like, you can't go on a 5 to 10% engagement as a confirmation bias. If we look at even those metrics right there, like you have to be able to look at things a little broader and understand that, yeah, like I might have gotten X amount of, likes, comments, or DMs based on this post, but look at the thousands of people sometimes that just didn't engage at all.
Yeah.
They just kept on scrolling, and you can't leave those people out of the equation. So again, if you really want to be able to educate people, if you really want to be able to communicate with people, generally speaking, and this is where a lot of even, from a psychology perspective, a lot of the learning based research has come in is, you basically want to speak just above somebody's level of understanding. So there's enough familiarity to build upon without completely losing them in the process of the conversation. And most coaches speak 10 to 20 times minimum above their actual clientele's base of understanding. Right. So we've all been there, it's like I love big words. I love education. I've left a lot of clients staring glassy eyed at me, like completely not understanding what I was saying and more confused after a session than confident. Right. And I think that's something I had to learn really early on in my career, that wasn't helping me. It was just me serving my own ego most of the time, and my own insecurities most of the time.
I used to even try to justify doing that sometimes when it's like, well, they'd be asking all this stuff. They'd be asking all these dumb questions and they'd be asking all this stuff. And it's like, well, I'm just going to give them all the information right now so they stop talking about it.
I'm going to water hose them.
Yep. It's like, well, I could have done this a little bit better. I should have probably handled this one easier.
Yeah. Drinking from the water hose, so to speak. Yeah. And again, it's like, we think about, like, we're basically just looking at progressive overload from an informational standpoint, right? So if you go into a gym and you want to improve your 1 rep max on a squat to 450, but you only squat 225, do you load up the fucking bar to 450 and hope for the best? Like, no. You linear progress off of 225 until you meet a threshold, and then you go through probably, again, a more complex training process. But you don't just load up the end result and hope for the best, right? it's the same thing with conversation, right? When we start talking about educating our clients, we don't speak to them on our level of understanding from a fitness perspective. Like we're professionals in this industry, right? We speak with them on their level of understanding and build from there, right? So again, we wouldn't go into any other scenario with that approach, right? So, and again, if you know how to explain things and you know how to get a point across, and big capital letters, simplifying your language does not equate to lesser training, right? It's just how we describe the training itself. This doesn't mean that you have to water down, quote unquote, your training. It just means how you explain the training and deliver the training to the client is going to be different, right? Your exercise selection, your sets, reps, your programming doesn't have to change at all, right? We're only talking about communication here, right? And then the other big thing that we see in the industry, and we're going to have this is something I actually wrote several papers on in my graduate work, but we talk a lot about in this industry that, motivation is bad, right? Discipline over motivation is like this huge thing. Like everybody loves their 4 o'clock alarm clock, photos, and talking about how badass they are from a training perspective, and talking about how, motivation is not a good thing because it doesn't have longevity, and discipline is the only way to get to your goals. And the psychology behind that is actually that, again, like typically we need motivation to get to discipline, right? It's a fluid process. These aren't either or, they're if thens, more times than not. And we're just looking at 2 different dopaminergic pathways, right? And the other thing that we need to talk about with this is coaches talking about discipline when we're discussing training is complete fucking bullshit. Coaches love training. Coaches chose training as a profession. Coaches are more motivated to train than anybody else on the planet. Even on your worst days, you're probably more motivated to train than most of your clients on their best days. Right? So again, like coaches talking about motivation not being good because, they woke up and they didn't, they were a little tired before they went to the gym and they had to have an extra energy drink to get through their workout. That's straight fucking garbage, when it comes to a conversational piece. And that's something that really bothers me because at the end of the day, like our clients, they probably do need to be motivated. They're usually very intimidated by the gym, especially you work with a client base who's with a very low training age. They are people that typically need motivation early on.
Mm-hmm.
They need to enjoy the process to build the discipline for longevity. Right. So again, Matt,
I was gonna say that ends up becoming a very important conversation to start having with people and start having with your Gen Pop clients as soon as you can, to give them the ability to start really enjoying the process more and getting them to kind of fall in love with the actual process of training, because that's the only way that we can really kind of ensure that they're going to continue to stick with it if we stop working together, right? We want to start working on building as many healthy habits as we possibly can. And again, now this is a bit of a side note, but Kyle put on his Instagram story a little while ago a poll about what are you looking for as a coach? Are you looking for the process, or are you looking for the result, right? And a lot of people chose that they were looking more for the process as opposed to the result. So this is where I get a little bit, I agree completely with what Kyle said. I want my programming to be focused on the goal, but I want the client's experience to be focused on the process.
Yeah. And
so we need to work on that communication.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, we get paid on outcomes.
Yeah.
Like our job is to deliver outcomes. And that's where the programming comes into play. But that doesn't mean these things have to be mutually exclusive, right? So when we actually talk about the experience of training and the service that you provide, you can still make that a very enjoyable session for your clients. Again, based on their biases, based on their preferences, right? So you need to understand those things. That's even where like the DISC and some of these other tools that we use will typically tie into that. So it's something that, again, we're going to talk about the biopsychosocial model on Wednesday, but even looking at the trans-theoretical model of change, where we talk about, building autonomy, right? That a lot of that has to do with motivation and enjoyment and building autonomy within the process. And that's where behavior change actually begins to take place, and so to completely just bypass motivation as this kind of soft science and something that, isn't necessarily practical, is missing the forest through the trees, right? And so we're going to talk about the free range model of leadership, or the full range model of leadership. And this is where, we talk about how people transition from something that's going to be more motivating to something that's more proactive over time, right? So something that's going to be more extrinsic into something that's more intrinsic as we kind of go through the process. So as we go into this, this is something that is built on leadership, but within the context of clients and coaches are leaders, right? We're the guides, right? If we start looking at things from a hero's journey process, like we're the ones that are guiding our clients through this process, right? So as we go through it, we kind of have, first non-leadership, and then transactional leadership, and then transformational leadership. And these are kind of the 3 steps. And I'd like to say that I hope nobody is into the laissez-faire aspect of this, but at the end of the day, I know a lot of coaches are, right? How many of you, especially, have been in the industry for a while, have watched clients, walk in and their coach has been like, hey, great to see you. What do you want to work on today?
I've done it.
I've done it. I've definitely done it. Right? Like that. I'll wear the shame.
Yep, I've done it 100%.
Career, right? So again, like, does that sound like a program to you? Like, that's not a program. That's not leading anybody. That's letting the client completely dictate what's going to happen within the session and what their experience is. But that's not what we're paid to do either, right? That's not going to produce the outcomes we're probably looking for. So again, first and foremost, we have laissez-faire. We've got non-leadership as a form of leadership, right? And then as we go through this process, we go into transactional and transformational, right? And management by exception, right, is typically what we talk about is, essentially management by punishment. Right. So we're going to motivate our clients to get the work done by, basically threatening them to an extent, right? Like, again, how many of you have given somebody burpees or assault bike sprints or something of that nature because they came in late, or they missed a session, or they didn't facilitate an exercise the right way, or whatever, right? Like, this is maybe something that doesn't happen as much as training, but like, as a former athlete, this is how a lot of coaches coach, right? Like, I ran more bleachers in college than I would ever care to admit. Months worth of bleachers, if it was all in total, probably. So again, like, these are things that, the lowest form of leadership will typically rely on is kind of a fear-based leadership model, right? After that, we have contingent reward. Right. So now we've gone from fear-based into bribery. Right. Hey, if you come in and you do this, we'll be able to do this. Right.
Give you some extra arms at the end of the session.
Yeah. I do this shit today. I do it now with clients.
Yep.
Like, I piggyback conditioning days with arm farms just to get people to do conditioning. Right. Like, contingent reward is something that I use all the time now. Right. So again, like, that's something we're all probably familiar with. Transformational leadership is individualized consideration. Now, again, we're looking at people at the individual level, and we're making, again, we're looking at them to be more proactive in their choices, and we're taking in more of their considerations. This isn't laissez-faire, but we're giving people options based on their abilities and their ability to understand the nuance of training now. Not just laissez-faire and say, oh, you want to do chest and biceps again? Cool. That makes 3 times this week. Great. Right. Now we're looking at giving people better choices based on their own individual bias and preference, but we're giving them good choices to pick from. Individual stimulation. Now we're looking at people that are proactive. They're taking a bigger part in the process itself, and they're making more choices outside of the gym that are going to lead to greater adherence and coherence, right? So this is where kind of behavior change typically starts setting in. And then we've got inspirational motivation. This is people completely buy in to the process, right? And maybe they're even leading others at this point, right? Friends, family, they're referring people to you. right? They want other people that they, they work with and love and whatever to be, to understand their new obsession with training and fitness and everything else. And then we've got idealized influence and attributed behavior, right? And this is where they become leaders themselves, right? And not everybody's ever going to reach that, but like I've had clients that became trainers and very, very successful ones at that, right? So again, that's where you've helped, take somebody through the process to the extent that they now want to be a part of it and be a guide themselves and be a leader within the process themselves, right? So if I look at this, like the majority of my training typically throughout the years has been kind of in that contingent reward and individualized consideration bubbles, right? Into the individual stimulation. That's where most of my people have kind of lived, with a few people rising above that. And I'm okay with that process because, again, training isn't their life. It's something they do, right? They're not coaches themselves. They see me 2 to 3 times a week, right? So again, that's something where if you kind of look at this process, kind of figure out where you are, and then where you are, maybe where your clients are on an individual basis, it will give you better, again, kind of a better plan on maybe moving them up that list a little bit, right? If you have a bunch of people who are on management by exception or laissez-faire, how can you get them up into that middle pack where most of our clients are going to prosper, right? So that's, again, don't want to get super deep into that, but this is something that I think is a good visual for a lot of people. It definitely kind of helped me retroactively understand even my own processes in the past and categorize people. So looking at this again, this is something that we kind of talked about a little bit, right? But clients will respond to a client will respond to different cues based on 1, their inherent communication strategies, and 2, where they are within their fitness journey, right? So again, understanding their fitness language, understanding what motivates them throughout that process. These are going to be huge when it comes to actually understanding how to cue them and provide feedback throughout the course of the session, right? Even looking at like things like the DISC, like Matt and I take feedback completely differently based on our personality types. We enjoy different types of feedback, right? So again, we, even working together, we have to understand that, just like we would working with clients. My wife and I take feedback and communication completely differently, right? I need to understand that so that I can have, again, more thoughtful communication and more effective communication with her. Same thing with my kids, right? So this is just part of being a person and part of interacting with other people. So talked about this, motivation often precedes discipline and proactive commitment, right? That's step 1A. Motivation turns into discipline over time. It's not either or. It's not A or B, right? It's which one comes first. And then how you communicate with your clients early on may look like different levels of motivation, right? So early on in the process, you might be working through transactional leadership, right? So again, leadership by exception, a little bit of fear-based, and then contingent reward, a little bit of bribery-based, right? And then later in the process, you might look at things that are more stimulating and motivating and inspirational, right? And I think that's it. That's kind of, also the process by which rapport typically builds between yourself and clients as you go.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point to bring up too, is like that's how you're going to start building rapport and trust with them a lot more.
Yes. Okay. I caught the chat really quick. Oh, yeah, but that's something that's going to grow too, right? You know, so again, and again, every client's going to be different on what that growth process actually looks like, based on what they're comfortable with too. So like I had clients I trained for years that I got along with really well, that we might have spoken like 4 to 5 sentences total over the course of a session. And then I had clients that never stopped talking. Right. And, again, neither one of those is good or bad as long as the work gets done and as long as they enjoy the process. Right. So again, keep the goal to goal.
Yeah.
Right. So getting into training environment, we're on the back half now, so we should have plenty of time for the case study, but understanding what environment you train in is going to be important as well, because there's a lot of things that are going to be out of your control and completely based on the environment. And you kind of have two options. Part of it is going to be you're going to have to change your demographic a little bit, or you're going to have to change your environment if you don't have alignments within that, right? So your environment will dictate the individuals that you're exposed to and the tools you have available, right? So again, just looking at the physical space, there's a big difference in what you can accomplish with clients if you're in a 2,000 foot space versus a 10,000 foot space. If you have all the machines in the world versus no machines. If you have turf or no turf. If your gym is air conditioned or not air conditioned in the summer when you're in Houston, Texas, right? Like these things all matter in the types of training that you can actually facilitate with your clients, right? When we start looking at these things, like the training environment, even from the most physical conceptual process, will dictate a lot of things, right? It will also dictate who is actually coming to the gym, because people go to gyms that suit their preferences, right? If you are in a Equinox or a Lifetime, that's a certain type of clientele than if you're in a CrossFit with a bunch of barbells and no AC, right? These are two very different clienteles. Maybe you're in a rehab facility and you work with people post-rehabilitation. Maybe you're in a strength and conditioning facility where you cater to athletes, and athletes are naturally going to be coming into the gym, and that's what you're exposed to, right? So again, the type of facility and how the facility is set up physically are going to determine the types of training you can facilitate a lot, right? For the most part, in general. So does the environment itself match your ideal client and training educational experience, right? Are you in the right environment to succeed? Does that environment bring in the right people, right? Your environment will also influence your client's perception of both you and the training experience. It'll set expectations, right? So one of the things that we talk about in the box gym world, if you guys have ever been in that, is prospecting. Everybody loves prospecting. Everybody loves going out on the floor and talking to people and trying to book consultations and assessments and giving a lot of, quote unquote, helpful suggestions and getting told to go away, for the most part, right? That's something that we've all experienced. Sorry, that switched when I turned off my phone there. So again, are you charged with finding clients through prospecting, or are they coming to you for a specific purpose, right? So, and this is something that I've seen a lot online, where we'll get a lot of coaches that talk about systems that they use and interventions that they use and how much their clients, get from those things and how much they benefit from them. But they work in a closed environment where their clients are coming to them because they're actually seeking out those types of interventions or that type of training. That's very different than being on a gym floor with hundreds of members walking around and trying to facilitate some of these things to people who are not interested at all in your strategies and your systems, right? So again, do those things match? They have different expectations and approaches are required for these things, right? So you don't know until you're in the middle of a box gym trying to get somebody with a weight loss goal blowing into a balloon.
Yep.
And then real quick that you ain't him, as they say. that might not be the strategy, the right place, the right time, the right person, right? So these are things that sometimes we learn the hard way. These are things that, again, based on your experiences, hopefully make sense. So
hopefully you guys, if that is the place where you're at, or if that is something that you guys are doing, hopefully you guys have a client like I did when I first got my FRC certification done. So I got one of the first FRC courses offered done. They came to like the Nike headquarters, and then like some place in New Jersey was like the second one. So I went to that one.
I actually went to the New Jersey one too.
I think we were actually at the same one.
There were like 300 people.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, it was like there was a bunch of people there, and I was like, oh, I learned seminars from all of you guys. This is cool. But anyway, so I went to that seminar, and I came back, and I was like all like deep in that rabbit hole, right? Like really deep in that. And I had this little client of mine named Lauren, who's 5'1", and she's like 116 pounds, and she had the personality of somebody that you would expect when they're 5'1" and 116 pounds and lives in the East Coast. So she was very loud and boisterous and very, very like dominating personality.
She was
True.
really, she was 6'8", 275.
At least. So I'm making her do some FRC stuff, and she just looks at me and goes, "What the fuck are we doing this for? This is dumb. Can I go deadlift?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess I'm not using this with anybody else anymore." It was like literally the first day that I got to use it, and I was like, "Okay, well, she just shit all over everything that I wanted to do. So I guess we're gonna go back and deadlift again." And it was great because then I got to learn about when it was actually important to do with the correct people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think even on a broader scale, like, because I used to see this all the time because one of the gyms I was associated with in New York got really big into like RKC and SFG about 10 years ago. And we'd put we kind of get everybody through like the level ones, and they'd come through and like everybody did kettlebells the next week. Didn't matter what their goals were. Everybody was learning how to do kettlebells. And 75% of the clients absolutely hated it. They complained about it. They hated all of it. It didn't match their goal selections. It hurt their wrists, whatever. And coaches found out really quickly, like, oh, I'm super hyped up on this thing because I just went and drank all the Kool-Aid and feel great about it. I love training this way. But my clients don't necessarily like doing this, and I have to be flexible in my approach. And I think, again, I've seen the same thing with I've seen it with everything, TRX certs, whatever. Like even like USAW, where all of a sudden like everybody's doing like Dow snatches, and you're just like, that in no way meets that person's goal. But here they are. They're doing it. They're learning how to do a snatch for no reason, right? And again, it's one thing if you're in an environment where like sports performance and those things like that might be useful, but understanding who you're working with and what their goals are is huge, right? So again, you can take education that suits your own biases and have a lot of fun with it and use it for some people, but just understand that you can't broadly apply it to everybody, most likely, right? So again, unless you are in that situation where you are working in with an environment with a demographic that completely match your own bias too. And if that's the case, ignore everything I just said and just fucking crush it. Enjoy it, live your life, love it. So again, what we talk about here, not just the training model, but the service model, right? So again, proactively plan out what your client's experience should be, right? And this is something that sounds really simple, but at the end of the day, like, what do you want your people to feel during the experience of training with you? And and when you plan it out, plan it from the client inquiry all the way through, right? We went through the case study document last week. We have everything from intake to email template responses, right? Like, what's your response when somebody inquires? What do you want them to feel? Like, how excited do you want them to be through that process? What's that copy look like as you're writing those emails? What experience do you want them to have when they go through it? Do you want them to be excited to click on that consultation link, or do you want them to be like super informed, right? And maybe that email is almost a barrier to entry. Sometimes it's another filter, right? So again, you get them on the consultation. What do you want that experience to be? Are you asking a lot of questions? Are they doing most of the talking? How do you standardize that? How do you get the information you want out of that? You go through the assessment process, same thing. Are you building confidence, or are people really self-conscious going through that process with you? Are you giving them, hope that they're going to achieve their goals, or are you telling them the things that they're not going to be able to do? Right? What's that process look like? And then all the way into the actual training session itself, are you there early? Do you have a towel and a water for them? Are you greeting them at the door? Are you shaking their hand? What's that process look like? Right? So again, all the way through, how do you want them to feel? It sounds really simple, but it's not. It is something I think that it's worthwhile breaking down. And then again, if you're not seeing alignment, what are you going to do about it? Right? Do you have a mismatched client archetype and environment? Because if you do, you're probably going to have to change one of those things. Which one has the bigger ROI? Right? If you're in a space that doesn't cater to the clientele that you want to train, you're in a situation like I was early on in my career, and like what Matt was, where we wanted to work with athletic populations, but we wound up in gin pop box gyms.
Yep.
And we had to change our approach and the education we provided, everything. Right. So again, if you can change facilities, that's great. That might be something that has a bigger ROI for you. You have to figure out the best decision for you based on those things. And then again, creating the service model itself, understanding as you kind of go through the archetype, you understand who your people are, you understand what their expectations are. How do you meet and exceed those things? Right. So again, kind of breaking these down into 3 categories, right? Intake, consultation, and assessment. These are all kind of the pre-training aspects, but these set the stage for everything. And this is something that a lot of coaches really kind of gloss over too much, and this is something like, even if you've been in a box gym, like you're almost taught to just fill out the paper and get it over with, right? It's a 1-sheeter, has a part Q. It's got like 4 questions and a basic assessment template where you throw somebody through the FMS or whatever, and that's something that probably doesn't do the client or your experience with the client much justice a lot of the times, right? So now that you're doing your own thing, hopefully if you're in this group or you want to do your own thing, break down what you actually want that process to look like and understand what you want to get out of each of those steps and how you can, again, meet your client's expectations through them. Programming, training, and communication, again, same thing, based on your client's needs, based on their training history, probably their personality type, again, their goal selections. How do you make programming something that's enjoyable for them? Right? If you work with somebody who is very experiential and motivation driven early on, are you going to do just straight sets and linear periodization for that person? Like maybe not. Maybe they need something that's more novel, from that process. Maybe they don't. Again, that's a decision for you to make as a coach, right? How do you communicate feedback? How do you give cues? All of those things. How do you communicate outside of a session? What are your boundaries, from that perspective? Those are things that all need to be taken care of. So again, these are things that you need to identify and set a few standards on. Create a model for yourself based on your client base and these action items. And this is something that is difficult. I think it's more difficult than just writing out, sets and reps and exercise selection for a lot of people. So again, so this is an example that I've given. Again, my client demographic, is typically athletes, moderate to low injury history. I'm not working rehab with people. I refer those people out, right? So if I've got somebody who's banged up and I feel like I can't handle it or they need special attention, I outsource that immediately and refer them to a DPT, right? So again, performance-based training. I want to progress people. I'm not trying to regress them. I'm not trying to get them to a point of training and rehab. I'm looking to progress them from where they are, right? They're already highly motivated, right? Being that I'm a remote coach, me trying to play the motivation game is a losing battle. Like I need people who are already excited to get in the gym and want to just run through a brick wall for their goals, right? That's my demographic, right? So again, expectations. They're going to be looking primarily for direction and expertise. I know this just through our intake form and the analytics on the back end, right? So the intake, the consultation, the assessment, I'm looking to show consideration for detail, right? A high level of expertise. That's why they're coming to me, and an understanding of their goal and confidence in how I can help them achieve that actual goal, right? Why would you train with me instead of somebody else? Like I want to be able to express that very early on in the process, likely on the intake before we even get to the consultation, if not on the actual consultation. Programming, training, and communication. I'm looking to show agility from a programming perspective, right? I can be flexible, but I still am going to produce outcomes, right? So kind of what Matt said earlier, my programming itself is going to be probably very outcome based, but how I deliver it, I can be a little bit flexible in some of these things, right? And again, my programming has more inherent flexibility because it's usually less specific than like Matt's might be.
You guys will also get 2 really good examples of a way that we can communicate programming through like an outcome specific lens from my coaching standpoint, but also from the standpoint of just how clients are going to feel during sessions when we go into the case studies in a bit.
I think I'm on the last slide or the next last slide.
Yeah, whatever.
So again, I'm going to be communicative, but also set a lot of boundaries and expectations. part of that is for me because I'm super introverted. And if I'm overly communicative, I get really burnt out really quickly. So I almost have to set boundaries just even for myself. But in general, again, like that might come down to dollar per hour, but that also just comes down to my own mental health when it comes to work and life. And again, always make sure that I get their programming out appropriately. So we do weekly. So their programming is done by Saturday so that they can look it over before Monday. And then I want them to feel like they can trust me and give me appropriate feedback. And we give a lot of feedback opportunities to get weekly reoccurring emails that kind of go out and allow them to give feedback on everything from in-session stuff to life stuff. And then we have a monthly call, based on my program. And if they want to do something off the books, I've got options for that as well. Additional communication outside of training. Again, I set boundaries to protect my time, but also decrease their dependence on me. So we've created all the systems to make sure that they get what they need out of it, but it's in a very organized and standardized way.
Yeah. And now with the app that we have too, there's a lot of comments and things like that that people can drop, and there's chats in the app and like everything like that makes it a lot easier for people to have as much communication as they feel like they need.
Yep. They can always give their inputs, which is important. Cool.
All right. You ready for me to share this programming case study?
Roll with it.
Cool. So we're going to go through two of them today. The programming case studies that we're going to go through are a weight loss and a hypertrophy specific example for general population clients. So kind of like we talked about, and like one of the things that Kyle was alluding to earlier, you guys can see this, right? The long-term athletic development tab. Okay, cool. One of the things that we were kind of talking about and like alluding to earlier is how we're going to be very, very outcome focused, and we're going to be teaching clients how to enjoy the process a lot more. Now, one of the things that's important to note about an easy way to get clients to enjoy the process more is to make them feel like particularly with the people that you're looking at, or like general population for sure, but this is also going to be for everybody. You want to make them feel like the program is reflective of their training goal, right? Like if I have a weight loss client, why am I going to have them do like sets of 5 on squat with like a long rest in between? Like that just feels like a programming mismatch to the actual goal, right? So what I want to look at doing with them is I want to look at outlining a program that's going to give them exactly what they feel like they need to hit and make them feel the way that I want them to feel during a training session, so that they know that there is some alignment on my end with the program design and their end with the goal selection, right? So that we have that cohesion and we are moving together in the right direction. So the way that we get started with this for the weight loss client is we're going to go through, I'm going to kind of outline what we're going through with this one first, and then we'll go into what we're looking at afterwards. So we're going to be starting off with more of a systemic metabolic block. So a systemic metabolic block is going to be, there's a couple ways that we can do it, right? So if we're looking at the way that I'm doing this systemic metabolic block with this person in this particular example, we are doing a lot of peripheral hard action movements, which means that we're doing some sort of upper body and some sort of lower body movement in a superset with a timed rest in between supersets and a timed rest in between sets in general. So we're looking at timing all that stuff and constraining it pretty highly so we can make actually not weight the limiter on this one. I want the limiter on this one to be a little bit more of the cardiovascular capacity and their ability to just like recover in between sets. This is one that you can probably run for 2 to 4 weeks before you start seeing some really good return on investment, and we have to start moving on to something different. So it's one that can be kind of variable in length. But what I'm looking at with this is I'm looking at making sure that their limiting factor is their ability to recover and breathe between sets, and not necessarily the amount of load that that person is lifting. Now, why am I going to do that with this person? Because again, their goal is weight loss. So I do have to ensure that they're lifting more weight and they're lifting more, but those are things that I have to track. What I want them to feel, I want them to feel like they are getting worked very hard and they're getting worked in a way that's going to be challenging for them. Right? So again, this is going to completely and totally depend on the client that you're working with and the demographic that you are at and the client's ability level. But this ends up being a really, really easy entry point to get them to kind of buy into training a little bit more, a little bit faster. One of the nice things that you'll also get about doing a bunch of metabolic work in a row is that you'll also get a little bit of a nutrient partitioning effect. So they will get a little bit more efficient at partitioning the nutrients that they are eating. So they'll feel like they're going to get like a better pump. They'll feel like they're going to be recomping their body a little bit, which they may end up being depending on what their calories look like. And they'll just feel like they're generally starting to be a little bit more healthy and they're starting to move a bit better, right? So you should see a little bit of body fat decrease. And you also should see them kind of like look a little bit different as we're going through this process. And they'll also be able to recover a little bit faster when it comes time to doing the rest of the sessions. So let's get started. So if we're looking at this, it's going to end up being fairly similar to what we were doing in the previous template, right? So it's like a lot of higher volume stuff with a timed rest in between. Now, one of the things that we talked about last time is if I'm looking at somebody who has very non-specific goals, what I'm not going to be doing is I'm not going to be timing their rest, but I'm going to be tracking how long it takes them to recover between sets. But since the goal of this one is not the load column, the goal is completing the session with the rest times prescribed, I am timing their rest. That means that I don't really particularly care if I have to go down. Well, I don't want to go down in load. I want to continue to keep the load at the exact same point that it was originally. So if I'm looking at, if I have them like doing this goblet squat with a 20-pound dumbbell, I don't want them to drop that to a 10-pound dumbbell because they just feel like they can't recover. I want to keep that at that 20-pound dumbbell and then push that up as we're going. So this is something that we're looking at doing, and we're looking at starting them at an extremely light load or a light enough load that they could get this done fairly easily and give them the ability to get all the sets and reps done before moving on to something else. So if we're looking at these, I've outlined these in the way that I remember my old gym that I used to work at being laid out. So this would be supersets and things that would work very well in my previous gym. And I feel like a lot of gyms are set up sort of similarly because it's just like you go into the gym and it felt like every other gym ever. So it should be something that could be a fairly easy thing to copy, right? So if we're looking at this, the way that I'm progressing, I'm going to be training this is we're going to be still getting that ABC, BCA, CAB rotating schedule. We have lower body and upper body, lower body and upper body, lower body and upper body, moderate sets, higher reps, and timed rest in between each one. The exercise selection doesn't really matter that much, but they're covering every single movement pattern in here. So we've got a knee here, we've got a vertical pull here, we've got a hip here, we've got a horizontal push here, we've got a vertical push, and we've got a horizontal pull. Right, so these are just that we just have all of the movement options that we need in here. We have all the major patterns that are done. We're not looking at training a bunch of arms and stuff like that because, again, that's not going to necessarily feel super directed to what that client is looking for. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we're training the biggest stuff first, and then we're moving the way that we need to move. If we look at the order of this, I'm also using the two biggest or the four biggest patterns first, where you can probably push the most load, and then using the ones at the smaller ones at the end. You could make an argument that you could switch the vertical and the horizontal pull, which is totally fine. If you wanted to do that, you totally could. I just don't like having a vertical and two verticals back to back. I just don't want to have them do that. So it's one that I just don't usually make people do. Sometimes I will, but most of the times I will not. So again, looking at this, we will have that same ABC, BCA, CAB structure. And the way that I'm going to be progressing this is I'm just going to be letting them continuously go and progressively overloading the load, right? So if we start off here and we get this one done at 20 pounds, this time it's going to be 25 pounds. If we complete all sets and reps, the week after it's going to be 30, right? So I'm going to be continuously pushing them a little bit harder as we're going through each one, just because what I want to see and I want to get them to understand and experience is I want them to be able to put some effort in, and I want them to be able to repeat what we're doing. And again, like I said with this, the goal is to have them feel limited from a cardiovascular standpoint, not necessarily from a muscular standpoint. Because again, this weight loss person, muscle gain is going to be like tangentially related to weight loss, but it's not going to be their main priority. So I don't want them to feel like it's the main priority of the training program. I want them to feel like the program is directed and guiding them towards the path of weight loss, which is what they said they wanted. So usually with that, it's something where like they don't really care that much about getting stronger until they decide that they're going to care about getting stronger. Most of the time that we're going to do a program like this ends up working out fairly well because they feel like they're getting a high degree of return pretty quickly from the amount of work that they're putting into a session. Cool. After that systemic metabolic phase is done, we're going to go to a bit more of a local metabolic phase. So a local metabolic phase is going to now take the stress from the cardiovascular system and put it on the local muscular system. So we're going to be looking at with this is we're taking a small jump in progress or taking a small jump in stimulus and taking them away from cardiovascular fatigue and putting them more towards muscular fatigue and failure. This is also going to be helping a lot with nutrient with nutrient partitioning. So it's going to be something that's going to help like store a lot of nutrients in the muscles that we're pushing to failure. Now, the way that I'm going to outline and do a local metabolic phase is I'm going to pick the movements that I can do best. So we've got a push, legs, and a pull day, right? And we're going to have a same rotating kind of schedule set up as we're going through. We don't have a rotating schedule on this one. This one's just going to be push, legs, pull. I have another set of things that I could do here as a secondary one if I needed to do something a little bit different, or if I had a little bit longer of a session that I wanted to put them through. But what we're looking at with this, right, is if I wanted to, hold on one second. Oh, that's strange. That's a weird thing that shouldn't be there. This should be like this. I don't know what happened with that. 1 second, let me just fix this. Yes, that's where this should be. Okay, so again, technical difficulty aside, don't understand what happened with that. This is what we're going to be looking at with the local metabolic phase, right? So what we're looking at with this is I'm looking at pairing something that's in the lengthened position of the muscle tissue with something that's in the shortened position of the muscle tissue, right? So I'm looking at having them train at the fully lengthened spot of the pec, and then at the fully shortened spot of the pec, right? So we've got the dumbbell bench, which is going to be hardest at the very bottom. And then we've got that machine or cable fly, which is going to be hardest at the very top and a little bit easier towards the bottom. Then we have the same thing with incline dumbbell press and machine or cable press, right, where it's going to be a bit more lengthened and then a bit more like mid to shortened, depending on what you have, especially if that machine converges. Then we've got shoulders, lateral raises, and triceps, right? So we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here when we're looking at timing the rests on everything. So there is a 0-second rest between their A series or their A1 and their A2, and then there's a 60-second rest between their A2 and their A1. So I'm looking at progressing this in a way that's going to make it challenging, but we're looking at pushing the muscle tissue as close as it can to failure. Now we're no longer pushing the cardiovascular system to failure. We're starting to push the local muscle system to failure. And we're starting to work on, like with this, what these people will experience is they will experience the nastiest pump of all time. Their heart rate's going to be crazy high, and they're going to feel like they're working insanely hard as they're going through these sessions, because they will. But one of the cool things about this is there's going to be a lot of force output that somebody can gain by going from lengthened to shortened. Because if we're looking at fatiguing out tissues, as soon as that lengthened position of the tissue is done, we still have a lot of work that we can do in the shortened position of the tissue, so we can get a lot more work done, even if we've reached failure on their set of 8 on that flat dumbbell bench. Same thing with their leg press and their leg extension. Same thing with their RDL and their leg curl. Right? So we have things that we can do with this that are going to target the tissues a lot, get them to work very, very, very hard, get them to feel very fatigued for the remainder of the day if that's something that they're looking for and that's something that they want, and give them the outcome that they're looking for and make it feel directed again towards the outcome. So with this, again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding in a little bit of volume as we go through. This one, actually, we stayed the exact same in terms of all the training volume, because, again, if they're beginners and they're relatively new to training, we're probably not going to be increasing the volume very much. And then we're going to go after this into something called an incomplete rest training block. So an incomplete rest training block is going to be quite short. We're going to be going through 2 weeks of this. And then I didn't write out the rest of it, and we'll just talk about the rest of it afterwards, because you guys will have an example of everything here. And then we have mechanical tension in the hypertrophy one, so you guys will get to see what that looks like. And I'll give you the rationale as to why we'll do that. But we'll go into mechanical tension, and then we'll start moving into the hypertrophy block. So if we're looking at this one in the incomplete rest, what we are looking at here is we are now starting to add a bit of a tempo constraint, right, which we didn't have before. So there's no tempo on everything else like that. And now there is tempo. So what I'm looking at doing with this one is I'm looking at getting that muscular tissue or that muscle tissue that we're targeting to fail. And then I am not allowing them to come to a complete rest, and I'm not allowing them to fully recover before going again. And again, what you'll find with this is that somebody will be able to, like, if we're looking for sets of 8, somebody will probably be able to lift about 70 to 80% of their 10 or their 12 rep max for a set of 8 with this, right? And then we're going to progress them through this by continuously adding a little bit more like training volume with it if it's something that we need to start with, right? So we could potentially start this a little bit lower. We could start this at like 4-3, 4-3-3. Like, so every 5 you would see, you would replace with a 4, and every 4 you see, you would replace with a 3. So you could very easily do something like that. But what we're looking at doing here is we're looking at diligently timing the reps or timing the rest periods to make sure that they are not fully recovered. And when those same clients look at you and say, but I'm not fully recovered between your session, you go, yes, I know. That's the point. I want you to go again, right? The goal is not to lift the most load. The goal is for them to get the most amount of work done. And what we're looking at with this is they're going to be looking at accumulating the amount of volume that they're accumulating and increasing that amount of volume that they're accumulating over the course of the training block. Now, one of the things that you'll look at with this, if I go back to the long-term athletic development tab, is that the local metabolic block is 3 weeks, and the incomplete rest block is also 3 weeks, and the other ones are both 4. And the reason for that is these 2 blocks are usually a lot higher training volume, and they're a lot harder. So they're a lot harder to recover from. You could even make a case to make this one 2 weeks as opposed to 3, just depending on how that person responds. So this is one that I would say, instead of having it be like a definite incomplete rest block, I'd put the little squiggly lines on either side, which refer to maybe. So I would say that we might even go through that one. But if they're getting as much as they can out of it, out of a 2-week training cycle, I might be able to just get them going right into mechanical tension afterwards. Does that kind of make sense? Does anybody have any questions on any of this so far that you guys want to type in the chat? Craig, you guys got anything you want to add? Kyle, you got anything you want to add in?
Nope.
Cool. All right. So mechanical tension, again, this is where I would kind of like look at transitioning potentially into mechanical tension if we were looking at doing that with this particular client. If we're looking at like cutting the stimulus here, but a mechanical tension block, this is going to be one where we're actually going to be starting to work on putting up a little bit more, like working on like building up a little bit more muscle mass, right? So now what this person will have done is this person will have done 11 weeks of programming that's directed towards weight loss, right? Because they're going to feel like they're working at a very high degree of output. They're going to be feeling like they're getting super sweaty. They're going to be working very hard during each one of their sessions. And they're hopefully going to be having a bit of a benefit from like their body's ability to increase their ability to partition nutrients. And they're probably going to be feeling a little bit better as we go through this. So then it's going to be time for us to start getting them into a little bit more mechanical tension work, because we do know that if you guys read Ben House's comment on Jeb's post yesterday, we know that increasing muscle mass will help to increase somebody's BMR by about 96 calories per day. So it's going to be useful, right? But we also want to be able to push their muscular system a little bit harder and get them to be a little bit closer to failure and get them to actually hypertrophy the tissues a little bit, so they just become a little bit more robust of an organism, right? So it's one of those ones where after this is done, after this mechanical tension phase is done, I would probably have them cycle back through systemic metabolic, local metabolic, and incomplete rest again. Because what we're looking for here is the prioritization of the training sessions here are going to be more towards this stuff than it is towards this stuff, until they decide to change their goal and do something different, or they achieve their goal and they want to move on. So that's the way that I would set this up. Like if I was going to do this again, what I would literally do is I'd almost have them repeat this, change this up slightly, change these movements up slightly, change these movements up slightly, and then give them the same thing again and just rinse and repeat until that person is happy. Very, very, very easy. Works really well. I do this with people in my garage all the time, and they're very happy with it. They love it. They work really hard. They feel like they're dying. They get a lot of pumps. They feel great. Afterwards, they get to go like do whatever they want. And I'm like, yeah, cool, have fun. And they feel good. So that's what we're looking for with this. Anybody have any questions on here that you guys want to type into the chat? Nothing happened while I said that last time, so I'm assuming the answer is no, which means we'll move on to our hypertrophy client. So our hypertrophy client, one of the things that we're going to be looking at doing is we're probably still going to start them with an incomplete rest block, right? And one of the reasons why I'm going to be putting in an incomplete rest block with this person, thank you, Kyle, so much, I appreciate it. One of the reasons why I'm probably going to put these people into an incomplete rest block first is kind of like I've been talking about with the clients on the previous one. We're looking at kind of like creating a bit of a better nutrient partitioning system. So they're going to teach them how to teach their bodies how to store glycogen in better places a little bit faster and a little bit easier. With this, what we can also look at doing, like there's also a decent amount of training volume with this, and there's a good tempo component, and there's a decent amount of mechanical tension to this one as well. So they're still probably going to make a little bit of growth, but they're probably not going to grow as much as they will in the sequential blocks. We are just going to set the stage for them to do really well as they go through this one into the next couple training blocks. So it's going to be the same training block as the other one, right? As we're going through the incomplete rest block. Sorry, I just completely totally blanked on the name of this block, even though it's written out right there. But we're going to go through that same kind of incomplete rest block where we're timing all the rest periods, getting them some gnarly pumps, getting them going, and getting them feeling really, really good as we go through this with that same split of a push, legs, pull day through here for 3 weeks. Then after this, what we're going to start going into is we're going to go into mechanical tension. So mechanical tension is going to be trying to push that specific tissue to as close to failure as possible with as high degree of repeatability as we can, right? So what I'm looking at doing with this is whatever load I select for my 4 sets of 8 on flat bench, that is the load that I am using. I am not going up. I am not going down. I am staying the same, right? So I want to be able to make sure that I'm achieving all sets and all reps with that same load. So if I have somebody who's using the 60s for sets of 8, I want them to stick with the 60s for sets of 8 as they go through all 4 sets with that 90-second rest in between. We're going to stick with the tempo, make them pause it at the bottom, pause it at the top so we can get a little bit more mechanical tension into the tissues. Then we're going to get into a machine chest press, a costal pec press, some lateral raises, some more lateral raises, some single arm tricep push down, some lateral head tricep extensions. So just going to get a whole lot of work done. Blow their arms up, blow the chest up, blow the shoulders up. They're going to feel great. Leg day is going to be really terrible. They're going to go through leg press and RDLs, leg extension, leg curls, and abs. And we're going to have them do the exact same thing where it's going to be all timed, and they're going to be pushing pretty damn hard on all of this stuff. And again, pausing it in the same spots. Then on the back day, they're going to be going through a whole bunch of different back exercises where we're going to be doing the same thing, trying to blow up their lats, trying to blow up their mid back, and getting some huge, juicy biceps with a nice timed rest in between. Gives them enough time to fully recover so they can continuously put as much output in as needed on the next sets, and then we'll get them going again. So with this, we'll probably keep the same structure as we go through. There will be some slight progressions in terms of training volume week to week. So if you look at week 1, we've got 4 sets here, 4 sets here, 4 sets here. If we look at week 2, we still have 4, 4, and 4 on those ones. But if we look at week 3, now we have 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, right? So we're looking at just slowly increasing training volume over time as we're going through this one, or as we're going through this block. You can add sets to the movements that you find are more important, or the ones that they're doing well on, or the ones that they undershot, to continuously push a little bit more, right? And then again, on the next week, we have another increase in the training volume. And we have a slight increase coming in this training volume in this one by decreasing the reps on their main movements, right? So on their flat bench, their flat bench, then on their leg press and their RDLs, then on their single arm pull downs, we've decreased the amount of amount of reps that they're doing, added a set, and make them lift a little bit heavier. Next, we get the most fun ones, ascending load blocks. Now, one of the things that you guys will notice with this is that the exercise selection in an ascending load block versus a mechanical tension block end up being the exact same. That is on purpose. The biggest thing that we're looking at changing here is the intention of the training program and the training block in general, right? So instead of having them do the same exercise and like just completely and totally vary the exercises, what we're going to do is we're going to take that end point of where they were And now what I'm going to let them do is I'm going to let them ascend load set to set until they reach one all-out set at the top. Right? So what they're going to be doing is, like, for this example here of 5 sets of 6 on a flat dumbbell bench, is let's say their 5 rep max or their 6 rep max is 100 pounds per hand. I'm going to have them do a set at 60, set at 70, set at 80, set at 90, and then they're finally their last set at 100 pounds. Right? So we're looking at pushing those numbers up, and we're looking at building a bit more of a neurological stimulus and getting them stronger over time. Right? So what we're looking at with this is we want to, if we look at this all the way back from the beginning, right, we're looking at like building a little bit more nutrient partitioning and giving them a little bit of a sarcoplasmic hypertrophy stimulus. Then we're looking at increasing the cross-sectional fibers and the cross-sectional area of the muscle tissue in the mechanical tension block. So we're getting the actual sarcomeres a little bit bigger. Then as we go into an ascending load, which is more of a neurological phase, we are looking at giving them a bit more of a neurological stimulus. So we're helping with motor neuron innervation on the new larger muscle tissues, allowing the muscle tissue to contract harder so that when we go back to the very beginning, we can just get them doing all the same stuff that they did again from a much stronger point. Right, so that's one of the reasons why we're looking at pushing them up to complete and total failure as we're going into this one. Wesley, usually I'll keep a mechanical tension block around 4 weeks before adding in an ascending load block, because it's usually when people are just about done with it, and it's like, I kind of want to start lifting a little heavier. Easy. Now, one of the other things that you can do with this is we can continue an ascending load phase going into a second ascending load block where we start switching up the movements a little bit more. So now what I can start adding in is I can start adding in a little bit more compound lifts if we want to, right? So let's say that person has done very well with like dumbbell benching and things like that, and progressing up to like some heavy sets of 5 on dumbbell bench, progressing up to some heavy sets of 5 on like leg press or hack squat and RDLs. What I can then have them start doing is in that second one, I can start introducing things that are going to be slightly less favorable for hypertrophy and slightly more favorable for output, and allowing them to get really strong on those ones. Right? So it could be an area where I switch from dumbbells to barbells. I switch from the RDL to a trap bar. I switch from a dumbbell bench to a flat bench, right? Like, these are easy things that we can do to continuously work on motor neuron innervation and allowing them to get a more efficient nervous system where we can then start lifting heavier load again as we cycle through all back to the beginning. Craig, you went through pretty much this.
I did.
And how did it do for you?
It was awesome. And honestly, to your point about like when to decide how to introduce ascending load, like the answer you give to Wesley was pretty perfect, where I finished with that like mechanical tension block, and in general, all I wanted to do was get into heavier things. And then we went and did that, and we still kept the like incomplete rest or short rest, however we want to phrase it, in there. And when we pulled that out, everything just went up. So like it was the way that it ramps you into like strength training was really cool. And you don't realize how, like, in the moment, it kind of feels like, all right, cool, this is what I should be doing. And then when you ditch the rest, the timed rest, all of a sudden everything just like skyrockets up, and it feels so awesome.
Yeah. It's going to be cool too, because when like I put a bunch of people through this, and one of the things that you get people that like they're checking emails, or if they're doing it in person, they're just always going to talk about, they're like, I feel so fucking strong. This is ridiculous. Like it literally looks like it's putting turbochargers in all their lifts, and their numbers just go whoop, which is great.
Yeah. I PR'd every compound for a set of 5, like the first week. And
yeah.
Then we just build on top of that.
Continuously did that for the next 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, and this is also, so that's a fairly well-trained person, not a general population client. So imagine what a general population client will do. They'll get very strong very, very, very fast. So it ends up being a lot of fun. It ends up being something that gives them a high degree of buy-in, because they feel like they're getting super jacked, and then they can see all their numbers just going up, and they feel like they're getting super freaking strong.
And they feel like they're working the whole time, which is great.
Because they are.
Right. Not like when you're sitting for 10 minutes between sets or anything, and like the stereotypical like power lifter training. Like you actually move and do things, and then to see that still pay off with like heavy strength, like increases in strength numbers is pretty awesome.
Yep. That's why I really like the ascending load focus on training sets with people who are looking for hypertrophy, is because we can get all of this training volume done in a relatively short period of time with that 90-second rest. Because like a lot of times, especially in the very beginning, they're not going to feel like they need that 90-second rest, and they probably won't. So like if they start at 60s and go from a set of 60s for 6 reps to a set of at the 70s for 6 reps when their max is 100, like that's not hard. They're not going to feel like they need that whole 90 seconds rest, and you can let them go for it and then be like, cool, you just did your set of 90s and it was a little harder. So let's take a nice 90-second rest and then we'll go into your last final set and we'll see if we can hit a new PR with this one today. And they love it. And it goes really, really well. Cool. Anybody have any questions on these 2 case studies? That's all I got. I know I programmed dumped a whole lot of stuff on you guys.
I got.
Cool. Well, we had no questions in the forum again, Kyle.
The disappointment is overwhelming. It's okay. Everybody on this call, you're doing great.
Keep talking on Discord though. That's been pretty good.
So what we will be getting after this is we will be putting together an avatar for you guys to put together a program for, and you guys will be doing 3 programs, right? You guys will be doing like a general one, a weight loss one, and a hypertrophy one. And you guys will figure out what we can do with that. And you guys will be getting all that stuff. And you guys will be putting that all into the Discord so you guys can all have some feedback. So we will be looking at assigning that out on Wednesday, and that'll be due in 3 weeks. So it's not going to be something that's due immediately.
Yeah. But the sooner you start getting them in, the sooner you can get feedback.
Yes.
Easier to ask questions, etc. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about biopsychosocial model and dynamic systems theory. So
it'll be fun. That'll be another really good one. It's one that everybody needs to hear.
It's the basics. It's the basics.
Yes.
With a little bit of science.
Basic
on it. So thank you everybody for hopping on. We will see you on Wednesday. Have a great rest of the day.
Take care, everybody.
Later.